Yes. Good evening, Sir Secretary Schindler. This is Dilip Chinoy, Secretary General of FICCI. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me on this program, and really appreciate the opportunity to interact with FICCI once again. Look forward to this.
Okay, so a very good evening to all of you. We hope that each one of you is keeping safe and healthy in these difficult times. It gives me immense pleasure and honor to welcome Shri Harshwardhan Schindler, the Foreign Secretary, to this program. We're extremely thankful to you, sir, for agreeing despite you being so busy. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of the senior leadership of FICCI, Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, Mr. Uday Shankar, Mr. Sandeep Somani, Ms. Nanalai Kidwai. We also have His Excellency Honorary Barry O'Farrell, High Commissioner Designate of Australia to India. We also have His Excellency Ung Sin, Ambassador of Cambodia, and Mr. Charanjit Singh, Deputy High Commissioner of India in UK. His Excellency Siddhartha Suryodipuro, Ambassador of Indonesia to India here, and also Ambassador Deepa Gopalan and Ambassador Anil Wadhwa joining us. We also have some of our FICCI colleagues from our international offices joining us this evening. A very warm welcome to them. With these few words, I now would invite Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, President FICCI, to please deliver her opening remarks. Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, please.
Good evening. On behalf of the members of FICCI and others gathered here, it gives me great pleasure to also add my personal welcome to Shri Harshwardhan Schindler, the Foreign Secretary to India. And thank you so much, sir, for this exclusive session, for taking time out from all the multiple things that everybody is handling. I think we're very grateful and proud of the MEA for the tireless work that you have taken up in evacuating fellow Indians stuck in various countries. And the Vande Bharat mission has really caught the imagination and won the hearts of many, many people. I was just told by His Excellency, the Ambassador, the High Commissioner to Australia, that it's also allowing them to send Australians back home. So I think it's a double benefit. I also add my personal welcome to all the excellencies who have joined this conversation, and thank you for your support and all your interaction with FICCI. Also extend warm greetings to all other fellow members of FICCI. I think that, as has been said many, many times before, but can always be said once again, the extent of the unprecedented situation we find ourselves in has really called upon some extraordinary measures. And we appreciate the tremendous work of the government. We understand the complexity of the scenario and have been privy to multiple conversations with the Home Secretary, with the Commerce Ministry, with the health divisions, and of course with finance. And also appreciate the extent of the innovative measures which were being taken, especially in the form of policy initiatives which can strengthen the country for the future. The whole concept of the Atmanirbhar Bharat is something that we appreciate, subscribe to, and are wholeheartedly willing to support. While we continue engagement on further methodologies for economic revival, we very wholeheartedly echo and respond to the Prime Minister's call for all of us to work together to boost the economy, to support local environments, to appreciate the structural changes in land, in labor, as well as in the law, which will enable India to enhance its ease of doing business and hence become a more attractive destination for international business. We believe that on the agri side, there have been tremendous inputs, the MSME as well, extremely good inputs, and that this is a perfect time for global companies to look at India and for Indian companies to open up in terms of their capability in skills as well as in engagement. We also see this as a rare opportunity for deeper engagement, and FICCI has not only instituted a study among its members in terms of future actions, but has also engaged and begun a series of interactions with the high commissioners and the embassies of various countries so that we gauge and understand what is the expectation of international business from India. And we will be compiling this report. We have shared this with the Minister of Commerce and Industry. We will share this with the Minister of with MEA as well. And we will share the details when they're completely done with the Honorable Foreign Secretary. We're very happy to discuss further on this aspect. So we completely believe that this is a time for India to enhance geopolitical relations, enhance economic ties, as well as our links with various countries. We look forward to your guidance on India's policy, as well as your suggestions on what you believe FICCI as an economic body should be doing and what our members should focus on in the coming days. I also must specially mention the tremendous potential in the defense policy, which was just announced. Many companies have already reached out to us talking about the potential of this and the implementation and the execution implications of this policy. We also believe that there is a time for us to upskill, to scale, and to reach out in terms of partnerships, to use the digital engagement where people cannot travel, and we're very busy working with our members in terms of creating that. With these few words, it is my honor to also formally introduce our Shri Harshwardhan Schindler, who's a member of the Indian Foreign Service. In the course of his diplomatic career, which spans over 36 years, he's held multiple key positions in New Delhi and abroad. He served as the Indian ambassador to the United States of America, to the Kingdom of Thailand, and the High Commissioner of India to Bangladesh. He's also served in the UN in France, Vietnam, Israel, and South Africa. He's the most forthcoming secretary, and sir, it was a privilege to meet you on multiple occasions, but it seems like when we met at Rashtrapati Bhavan with President Trump, it seems like a decade ago. The world has changed so much since that pleasant meeting. But with this, I hand over to our Honorable Secretary and thank him once again for his presence.
Maybe
let me begin by thanking the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry for providing me with this opportunity to interact with its members and all our other participants today on the theme of the New World Order post-COVID-19. I want to thank Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, the President of FICCI, for her introductory remarks, and it was certainly has been a pleasure for me to interact with the President personally, but also with the other members of FICCI, including past presidents, most notably during my previous tenure as ambassador to the United States. I'd like to thank the Secretary General of FICCI, Mr. Dilip Chenoy, and of course, the past presidents and distinguished members of the Chamber, as well as the ambassadors who are present, the Ambassador of Indonesia, Cambodia, the High Commissioner Designate of Australia, as well as Ambassador Deepa Wadhwa and my other senior colleagues and other participants who are part of this interaction. Let me begin by just briefly going over what COVID-19 has meant and what it represents and what this event means for us. Of course, this is a major black swan event that is impacting most of our established practices, norms, and regulations. It is shaping up to be what is seen as a huge disruptor. The primary impact of this disruption is economic, of course, but it's also social. The impact is, I think, comprehensive. Global economic institutions have put the cumulative loss from the pandemic in the range of $5.8 to $8.8 trillion, or approximately from 6.5% to 9.7% of the global GDP. And that's, of course, a huge impact. The IMF has predicted a 3% contraction of the world economy in 2020. This is the largest contraction of global output since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And the Great Recession of 2008-9 and other lesser recessions did not reduce world output on any scale comparable to this. This is also the first economic downturn of this magnitude due to a non-economic cause. Quarantines, travel bans, and lockdowns, important to control the spread of coronavirus, have expanded the economic impact to multiple sectors of the economy. The initial supply shock has been followed by a demand shock, as both production and incomes have been hit. Whether the contraction will turn into a depression or not is unclear. The scale of depression makes it a possibility. However, the primary cause of the disruption is the pandemic. The speed of resumption of economic activity will therefore be a key determinant in preventing the recession from growing into a depression. The slowdown, of course, will impact all nature economies. Hydrocarbon and commodity-dependent economies will be hit as badly as manufacturing, services, mining, agriculture, and tourism-dependent economies. Global poverty and unemployment levels will rise. Expatriate workforces will be negatively impacted. Remittances already falling. The pandemic is also expected to leave us with a thoroughly different world, with tightened global financial market conditions, behavioral changes, and altered consumption patterns, such that our demand and supply chains no longer suffice to cater to the new demand emanating from a changed world. The economic order that existed in the pre-pandemic times will have changed significantly in the post-pandemic period. And this pandemic has not just stressed our systems globally, but has also exposed the existing gaps in our systems, forcing all of us to identify the loopholes, regroup, reform, and reinvent. This reinvention of the global economic order is something that we must all prepare for. One particular aspect highlighted by the International Monetary Fund as important for the road to recovery has been strong multilateral cooperation. India has been at the forefront of organizing multilateral, let's say, cooperation in this manner. You are all aware that the Prime Minister was himself instrumental in initiating a conversation dialogue at G20 level, at the SAARC level, and of course, we were participants in many other forums, including NAM, and of course, different forums at the foreign minister level, including BRICS and the SCO. This will continue to be critical in our collective fight against the pandemic, as also for a global economic recovery. There are several emerging areas where international collective endeavor has gained prominence. Countries are coming together to develop vaccines and therapeutic treatments to contain the spread of the virus. We'll also have to work together to ensure that the economic fallouts of the pandemic are evenly distributed, so that no one country has to bear a disproportionate amount of the economic recession triggered by the global pandemic. For countries in the global south, it becomes even more important to ensure that in our efforts to fight the pandemic, we don't end up reversing the gains we've made in poverty alleviation, other socioeconomic concerns, which are of high priority to all of our countries. The current crisis has also impacted on the process of globalization. We are looking at what is being increasingly termed as a new normal, yet the contours of this new normal remain highly uncertain. It is, however, increasingly certain that at least in the short term, countries will look to locate their production and supply chains, localize their production and supply chains so as to mitigate the disruptive effects of a global calamity, such as this one. In the medium to long term, however, as investor confidence improves and consumption goes up, we might expect to witness a resurgence in global trade, movement of capital and people across borders. The scale and speed of globalization will undoubtedly suffer in the short term, but its long-term trajectory will depend on how quickly we're able to contain and control the spread of the pandemic. I'll also now briefly focus on what it means for India, as we are in the period of the pandemic and after the pandemic. Our global supply chains have been severely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. That, of course, is evident and is also common to all other countries. The drawbacks of increased dependence on our supply chains on a particular country or region in the world have been exposed by the pandemic, and the need to build resilience by increased diversification and innovation has made itself starkly evident. In the changed times, an integration of supply-demand basics with highly diversified value chains, emerging technologies, and artificial intelligence present us with an important opportunity. Conventional solutions to mitigating the risks of supply chain disruptions will need to give way to new methods, which will involve increased use of innovative digital platforms and applications that have emerged in the last few years. IT and IT-enabled services have been the strong points of the Indian services sector. Low labor costs and a vibrant demography have also been key strengths of the Indian economy. India has already proved its mettle in several critical sectors of the world economy. Our reputation as the pharmacy of the world and the source of low-cost drugs is lost on no one. We are also the largest contributor to the global IT outsourcing industry. Agri-based food processing, textiles, automobiles, electronics are of the fastest growing industries, some of our fastest growing industries in our economy. Building on our strengths and enhancing our potential is therefore key to our economic revival and growth, as well as to positioning ourselves as the low-cost manufacturing destination of the world. In his address to the nation last week, the Prime Minister identified 5 key pillars of our future economic roadmap, and this includes economy, infrastructure, demography, democracy, and supply chains. Successful integration and assimilation of all of these factors will be crucial to achieve a quantum jump in our overall growth and development. In India, there was already an ongoing thinking within the ministries on formulating a strategy that would position India as an alternate manufacturing destination in the wake of disruptive effects of the US-China trade war. The idea behind this initiative was to allow manufacturing and trading companies looking to diversify their operations by adding India as the other location in Asia. To speed this up, we are looking to address several bottlenecks and usher in reforms which would make Indian industries competitive and help them match up to global standards of production. The Government of India has been working from the word go to assess our particular set of challenges in the face of this pandemic. Saving lives has been our topmost priority. Our healthcare systems have been ramped up significantly in the last few months to an extent that we can now mass produce PPE kits, masks, hand sanitizers, and testing kits. And of course, the Ministry of External Affairs has been an integral part of the government process in getting some of these things moving forward, something that I could speak about in the later interaction that we have kept time for. But these items were imported from other countries only a few months ago. And this demonstrates the potential in India, which still remains untapped to a large extent, and is the key to our economic revival. From saving lives to saving both lives and livelihoods, as the PM has mentioned, Jaan Bhi or Jahan Bhi, the policy approach with the Government of India over the past few months has worked to become an all-encompassing one, stressing on the need to revive our economy in a manner which makes it immune to the vagaries of an increasingly uncertain future. To mitigate these uncertainties and instill confidence in our businesses and industries, to make our domestic manufacturers globally competitive, to integrate our domestic agriculture and small farmers with global food supply chains, and to open the markets to increase incoming investments in technologies, the Government of India has announced a set of bold economic reforms under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. This vision of economic revival aims to provide short-term relief to our citizens impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, while also defining a long-term economic roadmap to achieve the government's vision of a 5 trillion economy by 2024. The Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan takes into account the largely untapped domestic potential and the ever-growing domestic demand, which are the two key boons for the Indian economy, and builds on them to provide a new strategic roadmap for the growth of India's agriculture, manufacturing, and services sector. Now, a brief word on the economic reforms announced by the Government of India. The idea behind self-reliance or Nirvarta is not to turn the country inwards or into an isolationist country, but on the contrary, it is to ensure that India can emerge as a global nerve center of the complex modern multinational supply chains. As External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar noted, foreign policy begins at home, and a strong economy allows us to be heard in the world. A self-reliant India will have more to offer to the world, and it is a part of our duty to support the collective global effort to mitigate disruption in global supply chains by increasing supplies of products where we have availability and develop capacities where we have the potential. The sum total of all the economic relief and stimuli measures, including those announced since the very beginning of the lockdown, amount to rupees 20 lakh crore, equivalent to 10% of India's GDP. These measures are broad-based and cover every section of the Indian economy, including small farmers, laborers, MSMEs, middle class, migrant workers, startups, small business, healthcare, housing, education, among others. A big boost has been provided to private sector participation in 8 sectors, including coal, minerals, defense production, civil aviation, power distribution, social infrastructure, space, and atomic energy. These policies have opened a large part of the previously restricted economic sectors to the participation of private players. The measures to provide economic relief and stimulus reflect the confidence the government has in the capabilities of our private sector, and also the belief that increased collaboration between the government and businesses will only benefit the country at large. Minimum government and maximum governance has been our mantra, and these reforms underline our broader agenda. All of these reforms have leveled the field for Indian industries that until now were at the receiving end of unfair competitive practices, complicated laws and regulations. The reforms have aimed to do away with some of the major bottlenecks in our domestic business environment. In addition, the government has also made it easier for businesses to access capital at affordable rates, which will push up production, provide greater employment, and aid consumption in the country. The reforms are also a roadmap for our economic revival, and industries would do well to seize the opportunity presented by these announcements and turn them, of course, to benefit. We are working to make it easier for businesses, and our efforts will continue to be directed towards this goal. Now I come to the role of Indian foreign policy and where the Ministry of External Affairs has a role to contribute to this overall effort. Indian foreign policy and diplomatic efforts, of course, will be in tandem with the domestic efforts of the government to promote the country as the alternate low-cost manufacturing destination of the world. The Ministry of External Affairs, with the support of our embassies and high commissions, has undertaken a preliminary assessment of the impact of the current crisis on the Indian industry's prospects abroad, and also the opportunities and challenges emerging from the current situation. And much of this, of course, has been contributed by my colleague, Additional Secretary Economic Relations, Shri P. Harish, who's here with me. He's been our interface not just on economic multilateral relations, which is organizations like the BRICS and IBSA and several other organizations of which we are members, but also our interface with industry and industry associations. Let me share some of the preliminary inputs and assessments that we have prepared and received and prepared on the basis of inputs so far. One is that the record of managing the pandemic of this scale with decisive and early steps and a low per capita incidence and death rate has drawn international attention to our healthcare and public administration capabilities. India has also simultaneously acted as the pharmacy of the world and healthcare supplier to all parts of the globe. These are going to brand India as a disaster management power and a global first responder. It will be seen as a developing country healthcare power, or rather we will be seen as a developing country healthcare power, which has demonstrated an ability to take the lead in developing regional and global strategies for recovery. A large number of our missions have reported that there is a market for food, agricultural products, and expertise in food processing industries. Indian automobiles, particularly low-cost automobiles, including 2- and 3-wheelers, will have an augmented market in developing countries. Textiles, garments, and consumer durable industries will have export opportunities as many markets look to diversify their sources of supply. Indian e-commerce, IT, and IT-enabled services will have also demonstrated that they can work through a crisis of this magnitude. These are obviously the businesses of the future. Digital highways can be used to launch our higher education capabilities through tele-education onto a much larger market. Cooperation in healthcare, in pharma, in basic research, in vaccines, in diagnostics, in devices, in telemedicine, in hospital administration, and in healthcare supplies and expertise is a major opportunity for India. This is an area where India has the ability to be a bridge between the developed and developing world and facilitate a two-way flow of information and expertise. We have institutions that can be plugged into class-leading global healthcare systems. These institutions are also able to facilitate the flow in the other direction to our development partners. There is also a significant and growing interest in yoga and holistic treatment. This is a sector where India has considerable strengths. The Prime Minister has already spoken about yoga as a stress reliever in a time when much of the world is under lockdown. He has also spoken about traditional medicine as a possible boost to the immunity systems of people as they, tackle the challenge of COVID-19. Investments in Ayurveda and yoga during this time are expected to find a market. The soft power returns for such investments are also likely to be substantial. A major economic opportunity for India will arise from the drive to diversify global supply chains. The attraction of investing in India are obvious. It is a major opportunity and needs to be grasped. Our diplomatic missions, in collaboration with the Department of Commerce, are also exploring sourcing and export opportunities in various countries and guiding our exporters by putting potential suppliers and buyers in touch with our export promotion councils and industry associations such as FICCI. Accordingly, lists of product lines where Indian exporters can fill in the supply gaps of the world have been identified with the request of our missions to arrange B2B meetings with the potential buyers. In these countries with our trade bodies, the EPCs, industry bodies, have also been requested to get in touch with our missions directly and seek B2B meetings, both to hedge the risk of supply disruptions and, where possible, to fill in the supply gaps. Support of industry is also being sought as the administrative department for certain product groups in expeditiously reaching out to the industry stakeholders and to ramping up production in areas where we need to fill in supply gaps, both in new markets and existing ones. Needless to add, this is an ongoing exercise. These recommendations being made by our missions are continuously taken into account by the government, and our policies are adjusted accordingly. In addition, we are in the process of identifying industries and businesses looking for alternative manufacturing locations. The idea is to provide such industries with a compatible business environment and a robust domestic demand, which will aid investments into the country and generate local employment. Let me share with you a few ideas which could aid in restoring economic growth in the medium to long term. The first is, from our point of view, is connectivity initiatives in the neighborhood under the Government of India lines of credit, which can act as force multipliers to accelerate regional growth and development, promote people-to-people contact, and encourage trade and commerce. Several cross-border connectivity projects in roads, rail, inland waterways, shipping, energy, and aviation under Indian assistance are already under implementation, especially with Bangladesh, Myanmar, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Afghanistan. Enhanced connectivity provides a stronger foundation for pushing exports of goods, services, standards, and norms. Our companies should participate in projects financed under Indian development assistance. These projects help successfully showcase India's expertise in project planning, design, and execution, and help Indian industry in projecting itself as viable and technologically sound partners of developing countries in diverse areas. The pandemic has highlighted the global shortage of trained personnel in various sectors, especially in healthcare and digital domain, to promote employment opportunities abroad for Indian nationals. And I have to say here that, of course, COVID-19 has impacted on various economies all over the world. Entire sectors have collapsed, and as a result, a lot of our people who are abroad, both as professional white-collar workers, as well as people who come under the blue-collar category, have had to be laid off. Many of them are coming back, but there is a plan to utilize their skills, and I will come down to that. What we are working on now is bilateral migration and mobility partnerships and social security agreements. These are important as they facilitate an orderly migration of workers and ensure seamless social security coverage. They also avoid double payments by Indian workers abroad. Recently, we have concluded such agreements with Portugal and France. We are also preparing a data bank. As people return to India under the Vande Bharat mission, we are collating data on their skill sets of all our expatriates, and this is an important database. We are matching their skill sets with the needs of industry domestically and abroad. We are also sharing this with the Ministry of Skills Development so that they can look at retraining, making sure that our people are in a position where they can be, put their skills to the best use, and they can put their, make sure that they are re-employed wherever the demand is there for them. We also need to focus on what the Prime Minister refers to as the 3 Ts, the promotion of trade, tourism, and technology. I've already mentioned this, the efforts to diversify our supply chains, promote foreign investment flows, and boost Indian exports. Growth in tourism in the current scenario depends on the revival of confidence in travel. In the intervening period, we could proactively promote virtual tourism so that there is a real market after travel restrictions are lifted and confidence is restored. There will also be an increased focus and promotion of medical tourism, including Ayush, the identification and promotion of frontline technologies, linking our startups with foreign markets, their registration on various stock exchanges, etc., will be important enablers of economic growth. The pandemic has pointed out the need to strengthen the existing healthcare infrastructure and systems in India. Building preparedness to deal with such pandemics in the future will necessitate channeling of our resources to the healthcare sector in the near and medium to long term for the development of hospitals, emergency rooms, provision of equipment and supplies, and training of healthcare professionals. This will expectedly create opportunities for businesses and industries. Apart from this, we also need to utilize the ramping up of domestic capacity and production of PPEs, ventilators, masks, testing kits, etc. There's already a huge effort under progress, and I think today we are increasingly self-sufficient in a lot of these areas. As I said, more on this when we start interacting. These products can be customized and standardized as per global standards and requirements, and we can certainly look at how we can access global supply chains in healthcare and health safety products. We can strengthen our position in the pharma sector for generics, APIs, biologics, clinical research and equipment, and ensure that our products meet US FDA CE standards, just as our pharma has done with more than 125 FDA EU certified manufacturing facilities. We can facilitate a focused and concerted effort for collaborations in digital innovations in health, that is research, diagnostics, monitoring, epidemiology, and insurance, in partnership with industry, MSMEs, and startups. Renew our efforts towards regulatory clearances for modern and traditional Indian medicines. Innovate to further consolidate India's commercial presence in vaccines. We currently lead the world in the supply of vaccines. Focus on consolidating our presence in the generics segment and enhance resources and focus on new drug development. Strengthen the diagnostic sector to bring it on par with our drugs vaccine industry. We have to proactively develop export markets for agricultural products due to disruption in supply chains and the intent of many countries to diversify supply chains for ensuring their food security. This will also require significant investments in supply and cold chain. Some significant steps in the sector have already been taken as announced by the Finance Minister. Global energy partnerships with various countries in areas of renewable energy, clean tech, energy efficiency, and petroleum and natural gas will play an important role in economic recovery. Initiatives like the International Solar Alliance and execution of solar energy projects in other countries under the line of credit of $1.6 billion can enhance India's international presence in new and renewable energy sector. India has the potential to emerge as the preferred destination for higher learning. The government has already taken some measures in this direction by launching the Study in India initiative to help facilitate foreign students to study in about 150 educational institutions in the public and private sector. There is also a tremendous possibility of attracting foreign students in pursuing school education in India. Some of this is already happening, but the scope remains significant. India has rapidly developed, deployed, and scaled up a number of national digital platforms as part of the effort of taking governance directly to the people. Less government, more governance in the path towards digitization. There are several digital services that have been developed by India over the past few years. These initiatives could be promoted abroad. Our states play a pivotal role in attracting investments, and we as a ministry have been working closely with them to bring in foreign investors. We will continue our collaboration with states to develop export strategies based on their sector competitiveness and material and human resource strengths. We have repeatedly emphasized that every challenge comes with a hidden opportunity. This is not the first global disruption we are facing and will definitely not be the last. The COVID-19 disruption has given us the opportunity to do away with what has not been working and adapt our systems to a changed external environment, forcing us to be bolder in our outlook and firm in our economic choices. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schindler, for that very clear, comprehensive yet concise address on the current situation, what it means for India, the scenario ahead, the opportunities for industry, whether it be the supply chain, exports, or cooperation, and what role the Foreign Office and the missions overseas are playing, whether it is the connectivity corridors or all the other activities, the social security agreements, and the mapping of the migrants. So thank you very much for that. We do have some questions, and you referred in your address to that you're willing to take questions. May I ask Ms. Nanalal Kidwai to actually ask the first question?
Thank you, Dilip, and thank you, Harshwardhan and for what I think fills people like me with hope, given how grim and glum our environment here appears, and hope because of the opportunities that you have rightly addressed. I had two questions for you, in fact. One in terms of our engagement in the South Asia region. I wear a small hat there in terms of being one of the World Bank South Asia champions. And I'm really glad that you mentioned the connectivities on road, transportation, waterways, which is all very exciting. My question to you in terms of, the COVID impact is, do you see an opportunity for us by way of a regional trade policy to look at areas like food security amongst our neighbors in South Asian countries, and also a regional disease surveillance network, so that we can have shared experiences across the region? And I think a related area there would be migration and remittances. I did have a second question, but happy to take your response to this first, however you want it.
Please go ahead with the second question if you like.
So the second question was to do with China and how you see the role for Indian industry emerging, just given how difficult it is to gauge at any one time what our relationship with China is on a political front. So clearly we look to grab opportunities of companies that may move away from China, and I think that is absolutely the right way to go, as much as we can bring it in here. But China, to my mind, will remain an important trade partner. And we cannot ignore what I would say is the behemoth in terms of economies as they exist. So that relationship for industry, even as we look to attract, but we also want to partner, and how you would advise industry and FICCI to play into that relationship?
Well, thank you very much, and I think they're both thought-provoking questions. With regard to South Asia, of course, food security has always been a concern, and of course, COVID-19 situation only seeks to, I would say, draw our attention to this particular need for greater collaboration among South Asian nations. You're probably aware that under SAARC we have a South Asian food bank, and the food bank essentially depends on countries that have a surplus. It's mainly we who have a surplus in food grains production to be able to supply or rather reserve a certain amount of a quantity of food grains that could be used for the need of any South Asian country that would have a deficit in a particular year. And that sort of provides some sort of assurance that in case you do suddenly come up with a situation where you have a shortage of food grains, then this can be sort of met out of the SAARC food bank. And recently, arising from the COVID crisis, Bhutan had approached us under the SAARC food bank and requested for some supplies of rice, which have been effected. We maintain a certain amount of surplus stock for this purpose. But in addition to that, what I have seen in my own experience as ambassador to Bangladesh was that in a particular year, because of flash floods, Bangladesh lost a good part of their rice production. And as you know, rice is the main staple in that country. They looked to us for support, and we supplied a fairly large quantity of rice on favorable commercial terms to Bangladesh. And I think this is something that we probably need to work on further now. We need to develop systems that could enable us to move food quickly and at let's say affordable rates for our partner countries in the region. Recently, Maldives, as you know, is a country that is completely wholly dependent on tourism for its sustenance, as of course is to a large extent Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan in our neighborhood. And Maldives requested us for assistance in food grains. They depend on India for a good part of the commodity, the agricultural commodities, and we supplied 3 months of food grains. In other words, we sent a naval ship with 550 metric tons of food grains to Maldives, which represents 3 months of their, let's say, food requirements. So India, in a sense, is already acting as a net security provider. Security in this case, as in food grains. It's an important part. Food security is a very important part of what we would think is as being secure as nations and as people. And that has been, I would say, a norm that we have followed with most of our neighbors. We certainly, the crisis and of course, your drawing attention to this does highlight the fact that we need to probably do more to make it institutionalized, to have systems that enable speedier, faster implementation of the supply of food grains, and also, in terms of the affordability, the costings, and so on and so forth. With regard to China and the role of Indian industry, I agree with you that China is an important partner and economic partner, and one that we will continue to work with as we do with all our other partners in the foreseeable future. One aspect that did, I think, come to our notice during the COVID crisis is that when it comes to supply chains, including those that we are end users of, there is a very great dependency on China. If you talk about pharmaceuticals, in which we are world leaders, if you talk about hydroxychloroquine, the key starting ingredient comes from China. We talked about paracetamol, the API comes from China. If you talk about the N95 mask, you have the raw materials, you have the melt-blown fiber, you've got all the ingredients to build that, to put together that mask, but you don't have the crucial centerpiece, which also comes from China. So you have to find ways to build reliable and secure supply chains, of which you are a part, but of which you are also dependent, and I think that is important. And of course, as I said, the Ministry of External Affairs has been working with the Department of Commerce missions and posts abroad to look at the process of exploring sourcing and sourcing and export opportunities the other way around also, not just inwards. I spoke about incoming supply chains, but also outgoing, being how do we insert ourselves as part of the supply chains. And if you allow me a bit of time, I will just tell you that we've been working with our other partners to not only ensure that our immediate requirement for healthcare products such as PPEs, ventilators, masks, etc., are met by immediate imports from abroad, but also to see how we can assist in the domestic production of these items by providing critical components and also technology from various countries. But that also includes in the manufacture of vaccines, therapeutics, etc. We've been involved in the R&D processes. But in this effort, we have seen that our domestic production has ramped up to an extent that today we have a surplus of some of these products. I mean, it's, of course, still to be determined how much that surplus is. But if you take the case of masks, surgical 2-ply, 3-ply masks, there's a debate as to how much we produce. It could be anything between 50 lakhs and 5 crores a day in terms of production. But clearly, there's also a huge demand. Countries look at us as a qualitative, reliable supplier of these products. And like hydroxychloroquine and paracetamol, we really need to be able to lift or to at least look at how we can, make sure that we continue to be part of the supply chain. And of course, I would say the vision would be to continue to ramp up our production, then smoothly go into the export market once we have crossed our domestic requirements. And items like ventilators, which we didn't produce. I mean, today we are looking at producing 60,000 ventilators in India. These are items that we could supply to the rest of the world and become part of global supply chains. As I said, we are, of course, working to see how, with our missions and posts, how we can be also part of supply chains abroad. And of course, India's highly functioning democratic systems, high levels of transparency in governance are our prime assets, which are also important in building investor confidence. And combined with the ease of doing business, simplified labor laws, and perhaps easily accessible capital, we are also a promising alternative destination for manufacturing under the renewed Make in India program that was referred to a short while ago. I'm sure we can discuss a lot more on this, and thank you for the questions. Perhaps we move on to the other questions now and look at how we can take those on.
Yeah, thank you. President, you would like to ask a question, then I'll go to High Commissioner, Mr. Farrell. First, President.
No, High Commissioner can go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you, President. Foreign Secretary, I've been impressed by the active multilateral outreach that I've seen, not just your Prime Minister, not just your Foreign Minister, but you engage with through this crisis, including your phone calls with Francis Adamson on a weekly basis. But, whether it's medical teams into the region, whether it's pharmaceuticals to the world, I just wondered, and of course, a tremendous contribution in Mr. Modi's speech at the Non-Aligned Movement meeting last week. I just wondered what we might expect from India now that it's assumed the chairmanship of the Executive Council of the World Health Organization, and whether, given India has suffered so many pandemics itself, you think it might bring a new practical humanity to the way in which that organisation delivers its services.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner, and let me take this opportunity to welcome you to India. I know that you've come into our country recently, and I hope you have a very, very successful tenure ahead of you. And thank you for the question that you have on India's role in the multilateral field, in particular reference to WHO, where we would be chairing the executive board of that organization. Well, as you know, the WHO has been at the center of conversation right from the G20 to many of the other multilateral meetings that we've had recently. Many of the engagements that we've had have also focused on the role of the WHO. Fairly early on, we have stated that there is a need to empower the WHO to enhance its capacities, to enable it to meet appropriately the requirements of member states, particularly in dealing with pandemics and epidemics of the sort that we are witnessing now. At the same time, we have also said that our focus needs to currently be on dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. We need to unite our efforts. We need to make sure that we are, I would say, working at the multilateral level collectively to address one of the greatest challenges mankind has seen in recent years. We, of course, greatly, I would say, value this opportunity and appreciate the fact that members have selected us as the chair of the executive board of WHO. We intend to fulfill that mandate, which has also been recorded in the resolution that was adopted unanimously yesterday in this regard. And clearly, that speaks about how we can strengthen the organization, how we can investigate, let us say, aspects of the dealings of the organization with regard to COVID-19, but also in particular to see how the organization can better respond to the needs of member states, and of course can be empowered to deal with some of the issues that we would like it to deal with. I mean, I don't think anyone could have imagined that we'd be confronted with such a huge, let's say, catastrophic in many senses event that has claimed so many lives, but at the same time has had such a severe impact on economies all over the world. How the WHO deals with it, how it provides the normative leadership globally in dealing with crises of this nature in the future, I think is very important in our efforts. And of course, we have always called for the reform of international bodies to make them more responsive. And of course, we have to look at whether there really exists a need to have a new, I would say, arrangement that could enable these international multilateral bodies to work better. Clearly, many of these organizations were developed, in the 1940s, just after the Second World War. And what worked at that time need not work today. I mean, if you look at it, the United Nations as an organization was created in just post immediately after the Second World War. It is hardwired to deal with traditional and conventional challenges like interstate conflicts. But today you have threats to global peace and security that come from many other ways: threats of terrorism, pandemics of this nature, natural disasters which affect the entire world. How does the UN, how does its different agencies deal with it is something that we have to, as member states, work together to try and establish. We have to, of course, balance the individual objective of countries, but work for collective objectives of humankind. I remember the Prime Minister at the G20 meeting, I think, to some extent, evoked the collective conscience of the entire organization when he said, "Look, the G20 is traditionally had been created to deal with financial and economic issues, crisis of 2008 and thereafter. But now we really need, as an organization, to look at how we can deal with the concerns of humanity. How can we meet the challenges? I mean, of the entire world in coping with challenges of the nature." And then the G20 has done a lot of good work in providing a collective framework on which countries have been working on a lot of issues, including sort of rescheduling of debts of countries, looking at how to make more liquidity available in individual countries and globally. So I think the multilateral architecture is very important because no one country can deal with this. It's very clear that even among countries, no one is immune until each and every country has addressed this crisis. No one country can feel that they've achieved more than anyone else, which is why it's always a good reason to ensure that geographical representation of organizations that look into serious crises of this nature is a factor that overrides other considerations that come into, let's say, how international organizations consider issues. But I suppose as we go along, we'll see more of that debate coming up. But thank you for raising this very important question, High Commissioner.
Do you want to ask a question now, and then I'll go to Ambassador Wadhwa after that?
Yeah. So first, let me say, Honorable Secretary, that I was saddened by the fact that we weren't having a physical meeting, because if we had, the minute you finished your address, we would have all clapped. Because in these virtual meetings, it's really not the norm to do it. And like Naina said, it was truly inspiring. The amount of stress, tension, worry, disruption that everybody has been under, and the need to reinvent our organizations, to reaffirm some of our value systems so that people rose to the best version that they could ever be, not pulled down by purely commercial considerations, and those were quite considerable, to be very honest. But and also overcome the fear of the medical environment. So my first thing is really to thank you for that detailed address, and to really say that you have inspired us. I have two questions. One is a short, very tactical one, which is we continue to receive multiple requests for the export of masks. And you were right to say that the country, the industry, the healthcare sector, we've really worked very extensively together, as has done FICCI, in that we worked with the textile sector, we worked with the Commerce Ministry to help put the specifications together to inspire our members to work in this. And I'm happy also to say that multiple small women's organizations have stepped in. So the first question really is, when does India begin to lift the export ban? And when can we start exporting these products? Because I think the revenue and the foreign exchange will be very helpful. So keeping some kind of price control and a safe quantity for India, when will that happen, is really the first question. And my second question relates, very specifically to FICCI, which is, like I was telling you, we had already begun engagement, both with multiple embassies as well as our partners, in terms of preparing ourselves to strengthen India from the local manufacturing, analyzing the multiple policies, which we believe many of them are very good and will need some support in terms of execution. So we were preparing ourselves towards that. So what, in your view, is the role that FICCI should play in the coming future? Because we are extremely committed to making many of these potentials into a reality. I also want to add, and you will be happy to hear, that we've already started work on creating an entire segment of virtual exhibitions, virtual conferences, virtual showcase of Indian manufacturing prowess, so that we can begin engagement with international bodies. So that portion, we've already begun work so that we will be ready to support and to participate. So thank you, and over to you, Honorable Secretary.
Thank you so very much. And I think I'm as encouraged as you say you are, by the interactions that we are having. It's important for us also to get feedback from industry to understand how we can, factor in, as we continue to work within the ministry and with our other partners and interlocutors in the government of India, how we can factor in, the inputs that come from a very critical segment of our, economic growth, which is the private sector, and of course, the fact that the finance minister in her announcement has made so many different, I would say, significant, brought in significant initiatives that could, help Indian industry to regain its I would say, standing, but at the same time take it one step forward is, I think, very important. When we, of course, come down to the specific issue of masks, as you're aware, the government has de-restricted, or rather lifted restrictions on all masks except surgical and medical masks, which means that your N95, your KN95, and your 2-ply, 3-ply surgical masks are still on the restricted list, but the rest of the masks have been taken off the list, so they can be exported. Now, let me put it this way: that when it came to medicines, or when the crisis hit us, the first instinct was to put a lot of items on the restricted list, understandably so, because domestic requirements came first. So ventilators, test kits, PPEs, masks, and of course medicines. 23 different pharmaceutical items were placed on the restricted list. And we, the Ministry of External Affairs, in many senses, we are more sensitive to the international, let's say, requirements. We face the first level of, I would say, contact when countries want something from us. And I think a very large number of countries made strong requests to us to free up medicines which they required desperately. For example, South Africa had a very, very critical requirement for AIDS antiretrovirals. In the UK, it was paracetamol. In many developing countries, paracetamol and anti-malarial drugs, including forms of hydroxychloroquine, were very, very strongly requested because of malaria and other diseases that afflicted them. And from much of the Western world, from West Asia, there was a strong demand for hydroxychloroquine, which had been cleared by the FDA as as a possible cure for COVID-19. And of course, our ICMR had cured it also for use for our health workers, for people who are in ICU, who are COVID positive patients, and also for people who were relatives of COVID positive patients. So the demand had skyrocketed, and since we were the major suppliers, there was inordinate pressure on us, not just on commercial terms, but really on moral terms. I mean, on the one hand, talking about Vasudev Kutumbakam, at the same time, we are not really sharing the resources that the rest of the world has been depending on us for at a critical time. It would certainly, it did put a lot of pressure on us. It took us some time to work the system with all of our other colleagues in trying to figure out what was our domestic requirement, what could be the worst case scenario, what needed to be reserved for our, within the country, and what could be provided for export. But what was done was, except for hydroxychloroquine and paracetamol, we freed up all the drugs at a certain stage. And for these two medicines, the Ministry of External Affairs asked to decide who should get these medicines, what priority, what basis, depending on availability. So we rationed it out based on requirements. The worst affected countries were, of course, given the greatest priorities. We also kept smaller quantities for all our neighbors and partners in the developing world, which we provided on gratis basis. But I'm happy to tell you that we supplied 135 countries with hydroxychloroquine and paracetamol in huge quantities, and that is in many senses a success story, because we have not only managed to overcome, let's say, the issue of how much we required domestically, but also to be able to get them out, get the medicines out on time, reach countries as far as the Dominican Republic, Seychelles, Africa, on time, that their needs were taken care of. It's a similar situation now with, if you talk about PPEs, masks, test kits, ventilators, hand sanitizers. We've had obviously working within the interagency and interministerial groups to see how we can deal with it. As I told you, on the one hand, there is a sense that the items are limited by the raw material that's there. That's mainly med-borne fiber. On the other hand, the sense is that our production actually is far higher than the domestic requirements. A good way to gauge that is the price of masks, and the price is coming down. So it means that availability is there, but we need to get there, and we're still working on that process. The vision that I have outlined, and I told you, is that we keep ramping up our production and seamlessly move into the export sphere. That means once we overcome our domestic requirement, we move into the export sphere. We have, as of now, orders from a very large number of countries. Those lists are in front of me. I think there are about 20 countries that have asked for supplies in some of the items that we're talking about. And we hope that we will be in a situation where we could supply these products sooner rather than later. And I think that will enable us to come into the global supply chains in healthcare products that I was referring to. And this is something that we should be able to work on. The other aspect, of course, is that the question that you raised was on FICCI. I think FICCI is doing a great job. It's obviously ahead of the curve in trying to work within the constraints of lockdowns and the lack of travel. I think the virtual space is an important one. We keep in touch with our business partners, our interlocutors, with chambers. I think we have to be very nimble and flexible in this particular situation that we find ourselves. I think there are the traditional structures of business are going to change. Not just that, there will be greater emphasis on some items and less on others. I've already flagged some areas where there could be greater demand. And also in services, we might have less requirement for people in the construction sector, but you'll have a lot of requirement for healthcare workers. What do people require? What do countries require? What do economic systems require? And where can we fit into this is where I think our ability to prepare for these situations would be very important. And here again, I think clearly we would have to look at what the post-COVID situation calls for. Some of it I've outlined in my talk. I think there's a short-term scenario, but there's also a longer-term scenario. And we need to insert ourselves into all of these different, I would say, demand situations where we could play a greater role. And clearly also in terms of using, our, I would say, the fact that we are, a destination for investments, the fact that we position ourselves in that manner, I think is important. And it's not just the government in the policy sphere, but also industry and the private sector from the point of view of your own interactions with the partners and interlocutors that can create that opportunity as we go along. So I think, FICCI is already doing a great deal. We are happy to continue to work with you, and you are working with other, let's say, government ministries and departments that deal with these aspects, and how we come out is important. The Ministry of External Affairs has already prepared some position papers on the post-lockdown scenario and the post-COVID-19 scenario. How do we tackle it primarily in the economic side of things? There are other aspects also. There's political, there's social, as I said, but the economic aspect is one that does preoccupy us. I know that in terms of our priorities, we'll give very high priority to our economic engagement with countries. The High Commissioner already talked about, the Australian High Commissioner just spoke about the fact that we have a weekly phone call with some of our partner countries, which go into issues that are not only how we can assist each other, but also on how we can be part of global supply chains, how we can cooperate and engage each other better, how we can build secure and reliable chains, how we can also be collaborating on developing vaccines, therapeutics, and this sort of enhanced interaction is something that we hope to use to create space for our industry and economic interests.
Thank you. Foreign Secretary,
that was tremendous. May I also add one quick request? We're going to be asking for a copy of your comments or your notes, because I'd really like to republish them for all our members. I was truly very impressed.
Well, thank you. We'll make that available to FICCI, to use as you see fit.
Thank you. It was very inspirational. Genuinely, on the economic front, members are worried. So anything we can do to make them, bolster their image of the future would be very valuable. Go ahead. Thank you so much.
Foreign Secretary, I thought, can we have time for one or two more questions, or do you have time?
Sure.
Okay. So, Mr. Wadhwa, you wanted to ask a question.
Hello, Harsh. I want to congratulate you. It was wonderful to hear what MEA is doing, in any way also following what they're doing under your leadership. The multilateral outreach that is there. I know you're working the phone lines with different world leaders. One's quite aware of it. But one of the questions that I had was, one of the institutions that we do have are the summit meetings. And given my background, I was just wondering really about the Japan summit, the annual summit, which was postponed from the end of last year. So are we looking at virtual summits? Because I think it's important to keep up the momentum in the relationship. I mean, I did have a couple of other questions also, but I know I can address them to you. So I'm just going to ask that as one question. Another one to say is that this emerging post-COVID world order, is it going to be more multipolar, and what will India's role be there? Thank you so much.
No, thank you, ma'am. I'm of course with regard to the question on Japan. I think you have a very good take on it, given your experience and your own the role that you've played in bridging India and Japan relationships, bringing us closer, particularly in the economic side of things. And the annual summit has been an important part of that effort. We were certainly looking forward to the annual summit in Guwahati sometime in April. I think we had worked out dates for this. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has disrupted not just this, but a whole range of schedule of meetings that the Prime Minister had, including, of course, his visit to the European Union, his visit to Moscow for the 9th of May Victory Day celebrations. There's a range of engagements that have been disrupted. But you're right, virtual summits is the way to go. The Prime Minister has spoken to practically every leaders in every continent, every part of the world, reached out extensively. We are looking forward to a virtual summit that we'll have with Australia, and certainly looking to see how we can replicate that elsewhere. Of course, nothing can compare to leaders meeting and discussing issues between themselves. There is a limit to virtual meetings because of the lack of confidentiality, the lack of a personal, I would say, engagement that makes these summits so important. But nonetheless, if you can't meet physically, if you can't arrange those meetings, then I think virtual summits is the way to go. So we have to see how this goes. But the Japan summit is definitely high on the agenda, and we'll see how this can be scheduled at the earliest possible opportunity. Multipolarity, of course, is something that we have always advocated, and I think we are increasingly seeing a multipolar world. COVID-19 will also enhance that I would say direction, and I think what we look forward is a healthy interface between key countries of the world, how we can work together. But also, I think it's important that we also seek when we talk about systems and multilateral interface and engagements, how we can strive for greater transparency, openness, inclusivity in our dealings with other states, how we can also promote that concept globally and internationally, and how this can, I would say, impact on the scheme of things to emerge. But clearly, I think greater engagement all around is essential. And in post-COVID era, of course, greater level of multilateral engagement. I mean, multilateral, I don't mean just global, but also plurilateral, regional engagements would be very critical in taking forward not just cooperation, but also interests of countries such as ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. We have two questions. I'll ask the two questions to be asked, and then you can you could answer, and then we'll end. First is Chetan Seth. Would you like to ask the question, please? You can be unmute Chetan Seth. You're next. Both have sent it by chat, so if they can't speak, I'll just read out the questions. I think the question from Mr. Chetan Seth is that with the privatization of the defense industry and the fact that military exports are only the role of MEA and our embassies is critical and requires a focused approach to handhold Indian companies into the market. We would also like our products to be able to use the line of credits. what is the MEA position in this? And I remember very fondly when Mr. Harish was in Vietnam, we had actually accompanied the defense minister there. So this is the question from Chetan Seth. And I'll quickly put Sanjoy's question also. He says, is there an occasion, Ambassador Schindler, given your own enthusiasm to project India's soft power on the world stage, could we look to you during your tenure to give this area an impetus and use this to leverage India's position on the global stage and boost its economic potential? FICCI, as you may be aware, has a creative and cultural sector group, and we look forward to working with you to take forward what you propagated in South Africa, Thailand, Bangladesh, and America to other parts of the world, especially now where we can project ourselves and fill the void. So these were the two questions, Mr. Foreign Secretary. I'll just...
It's a question first about defense exports. I think when we talk about Make in India, defense exports plays a very important role. We have obviously taken some policy decisions to liberalize the sector, to ensure private sector participation, to ensure that defense production gets a boost, and also our defense potentials for export become prominent enough for us to be able to leverage when we talk about engagements with our other countries. And I think that is happening. Increasingly, we are looking at defense items as an important part of our export basket. And undoubtedly, the recent policy changes and the involvement of the private sector has made a lot of difference in that regard. And you're right in saying that lines of credit have a very critical role to play, because it opens doors to you, it provides opportunities, and of course, it provides countries concerned an incentive to buy Indian products. Vietnam is a good example. Ambassador Harish has pioneered the lines of credit in Vietnam on the defense sector. When I was in Bangladesh, I was also part of the initiative to provide a $500 million line of credit to Bangladesh for the first time. I must say it was not an easy objective to realize, because it was new, it had never been done. You would be surprised to know that we never had even the visit of a defense minister of India to Bangladesh since 1971. So all of these, let's say, glass ceilings were overcome. We actually had not only the defense minister there, but we also had this $500 million line of credit that was provided, which I think certainly gave us a foot in the door in terms of exports to Bangladesh, which had been a monopoly of certain countries in that regard. And I think government and industry needs to work closely together to try and understand where we can make that difference in terms of exports. There are certain areas where we have clear capabilities, particularly in the naval domain. Naval vessels are an area where there's a lot of demand. There's also a demand for our heavy vehicles, which is required by the military. And we need to look at many more areas where we can make that critical difference, particularly in aviation and other sectors that are promising. Electronics, of course. And a close interface between industry and government is very important in that regard. Pricing is one factor also that needs to come in. In many cases, we have seen that pricing that our industries project is not realistic internationally. We not only need to become more competitive, we have the advantages of economies of scale given our own domestic requirements, but also how to price our products to make it as attractive as possible for the international buyer. But I agree that a lot more work has to be done to synergize the expectations of industry and the opportunities that we can provide, both through the policy framework and through work on the ground in many of these countries. And our ambassadors, I think, are up to the task and are increasingly working closely to promote some of these efforts. It's good to hear from Sanjoy. We have, you're right, worked in a number of countries. And I do agree with you that as we go out into the post-COVID era, soft power will play as important a role as hard power. I think there is a limitation to hard power. Our strengths traditionally have been in the domain of soft power, in projecting soft power in multiple ways that we can leverage. Teamwork productions has been an important part of that projection and effort, and we look forward to working with you and others in this regard in time to come. We are also looking to see how the Indian Council for Cultural Relations (ICCR) can be revamped to allow them to play a more critical role in that effort in projecting India's soft power abroad. How they can be an organization that is more light-footed and nimble, and one that has lower administrative costs but higher costs in terms of outreach and delivery. And certainly, I think you'll be seeing more on that in time to come. But certainly positioning ourselves in the global stage as a soft power is an important part of how we see ourselves moving forward in the foreseeable future, and certainly welcome the opportunity to work with all concerned in this regard. I want to take this opportunity to thank FICCI, thank the President, Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, Secretary General, Mr. Shinoy, all of our other participants, members of FICCI. I certainly look forward to continuing to be in touch with the Chamber in taking our common objectives forward, looking at how we can work together in the post-COVID scenario, and certainly, as I said, my own personal interactions with FICCI in my past posts as ambassador in various countries has been one that will enable me to take this relationship, I hope, smoothly forward. And so thank you once again, and appreciate that opportunity to interface with all of you.
Thank you. We have also Mr. Sandeep Somani, who will just give a word of thanks. Mr. Somani, are you there, please?
Dilip, I think.
He's there. Very much.
Okay. I got a message. He had a technology problem.
No,
Sandeep?
Because he's actually met the ambassador many times over dinner in various countries.
That's true.
Okay, so I think he can't. So, President, would you please just thank
The immediate past president, who has a very good rapport and a regard for you, Honorable Secretary, sent his regards. He's having a technology problem, so he was unable to connect. So he sent me 2 messages saying, please convey my regards. On behalf of FICCI, I want to formally thank you for the time and for the inspiration, for the tremendous efforts that have been taken by your government, by the ministry, and overall, I think that you, of course, Mr. Harish, and the ministry have done so much that so many Indians will not forget the tremendous impact you've had. We look forward to working closely with you because, like you rightly said, the economy is a very important aspect, and we from the business chambers are very much aware of this critical link between business and the economy. We look forward to playing a proactive, active role with you in bringing the capability of India to the world and raising the tremendous image that India has across the globe, the soft diplomacy potentially across all areas, as well as what we can do in the medical field, in all other areas of manufacturing, in the good guidance you had given in terms of reinventing ourselves and the way we communicate to the world are all very exciting opportunities. We will be in touch. We will regroup, reform, reinvent, and not just revive our economy, but ensure that India and the globe thrives. So all the very best, and thank you.
Thank you, President, and thank you. We have Mr. Charanjit Singh, the Deputy High Commissioner from London, also joining us. Thank you, Excellencies, all Excellencies joining us. Thank you, Mr. Harish, for joining us. Thank you, everybody. And I think we end the session here. Thank you, and have a great day and stay safe.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.